Welcome back to the Sales Revolution. I'm Ingrid Maynard, founder and managing director of The Sales Doctor. This is a solo episode where I'm going to talk about the difference between business development or sales between B2B businesses and professional services businesses. Often B2B firms or consulting firms will go into a professional services firm and try to squeeze or shoehorn a B2B sales process into a professional services practice. And the problem with that is that they're very different sales processes. So I'm going to, in this session, just talk about the situation that professional services firms are in at the moment, why they probably need to now really arm their consultants, their practice leads with better business development skills. That sales actually isn't a dirty word, even though we would never use that word in professional services. It's always business development. And why the two are different, or how the two are different, because both are really important, but one's very, very different to the other. And it's one of the reasons why I'm supporting professional services firms with structure so that they can go out and generate the revenue that they need to. So let me talk about the context that professional services firms finds themselves in at the moment, because the truth is, whether you call it sales, whether you call it revenue, whether you call it business development, whether you even refer to that as, building a client base, the truth is, without clients, you don't actually have a practice. Bottom line. And it is easy to forget that, particularly when you've spent years at university really studying and perfecting your technical expertise in your chosen area or chosen field. But whether you're a lawyer, an accountant, an engineer, an architect, a financial advisor, I would even say an executive recruiter or even a business consultant, as you progress in your career, the more experienced you get and the more successful you get, the less your technical expertise is going to hold you in good stead, and the more your ability to grow a client portfolio is what will determine whether or not you get the next promotion or how successful you are in the firm. So even though sales is a dirty word, client engagement and business development absolutely mustn't be. Sometimes what we forget is that they're skills that can be learnt. So just like the technical expertise took, years in a university, the great news is that it doesn't take years necessarily to be good at client engagement or business development. However, we need to have some structure around how to do that and to take that to market. I would say once upon a time, for most people in most professional services firms, particularly the ones who worked for the big four, whether that was the big four architect firms or the big four engineering firms or the big four consulting firms or the big four accounting firms, that was kind of enough to draw clients in. But then a couple of years ago, we had something that happened to one of the big four. Remember PwC? And there was a leak that said that they were using confidential information for their own benefit. So they were kind of playing it both ways, a little bit lawyer X-ish, but they were using client information over here to win new client contracts over there, which is an absolute no-no. And the unfortunate thing about that is that the other consulting firms kind of caught that cold and suffered the consequences of that trust disintegration that happened as a result of that. What then that meant was businesses were no longer just going, oh, well, we'll go to one of the known firms. They were saying, well, actually, maybe we don't need to go to one of the big firms. Maybe we can go to a smaller firm for this component. And maybe we can actually pay less over there and get kind of similar results. And for the first time in a really long time, the big four and the consultants within those big four, and I'm not just talking about consulting firms now, I'm talking about all of the big four, whatevers in the professional services industry, those consultants for the first time had to be proactive rather than just reactive or servicing the leads that were coming through their door. The other thing that I would say is that there's massive missed opportunity in professional services firms to increase or expand share of wallet. And the reason for that is because consultants, and I'm using that as an umbrella term for architects, accountants, everyone in the professional services industry, aren't very good at internal engagement. So you, if you're listening, you are really, really great at what you do. Your area of expertise, tick, A+, 100%, go to the top of the class. You're usually really good at that stuff. The next thing that you might be also really good at is the client engagement and really listening to the client, understanding what it is that they do, and then delivering to that. You might be great at that. Beyond that, from what I've heard and from what I've explored and uncovered as part of my insight building into my service offer to professional services firms, is that most consultants live in and operate in silos. And they don't look around the rest of the firm to understand what benefits their colleagues can add to their client base, what some of the prompters or identifiers for needing some of those other services might be, and therefore how to bring them in. So the opportunity to really maximise that service offer to each client for the firm is lost, which means that profits walking out the door, margins walking out the door, and of course, ongoing revenue is walking out the door. And if you extrapolate that out, you also get a loss of retention from a client, because people are lazy. We don't want to be lazy, but it's okay if our clients are lazy. And quite often, if they feel that they can trust this firm, they don't want to. They'd prefer not to have to go elsewhere to get other things that kind of fall under that umbrella done. They'd rather do it all in one place, particularly where there's been a really strong trusted advisor relationship established. But that's one of the other areas where what I've explored and what I've heard is that consultants aren't great at. So let's talk about the difference now between B2B sales process and, say, a professional services process. The interesting thing was that this was as obvious to me as the nose in front on my face, but because it was so obvious, I completely missed it. And the truth is that I have been operating in this whole system my entire life, because I've been the salesperson for both of my businesses forever, and I've also been the key deliverer forever. So the difference is vast. With professional services, I would argue it's a circular sales process, because what we need to do is identify the new client opportunity first. Then we build insight, we scope it out, we influence, we win a new piece of work with that client. But then what we have to do as consultants is deliver to that piece of work, and then we have to retain them, grow them, nurture them, and then continue to get new coming in. And so around and around we go. As opposed to B2B, and this is why you can't plug a B2B sales process into a professional services firm, and why professional services, I'm speaking to you now, if you've had somebody come in who doesn't understand the nuance to consulting and that circular process that you operate in with business development, it's just not going to be a fit, because B2B is more linear in nature. So what tends to happen is you've either got hunters and farmers, or you've got a combination of hunter and farmer, maybe someone who hunts on the farm, okay? So you've got people that identify leads, nurture leads, convert leads into prospects, convert prospects into customers, and then they onboard the new customer, and then there's usually a handover, and that will either be to customer service or account management. And then the new business person who's in charge of new client acquisition will go back out there and look for new business. And if you're an account manager, it's still linear because you're continuing to hunt on the farm, as they say. So your job is still proactive. It's to protect and fortify existing accounts. It's there to identify new growth within those existing accounts. And it's also to work with new business too, so that you can bring additional accounts into your portfolio, so to maximize the portfolio value, because you've usually got an existing revenue base, but you've got a target that you need to meet, which is a growth target, and some of that will come from growth that happens in your existing portfolio, and then you're going to have to supplement that with new. So it's linear in B2B land, and it's circular in professional services land. So I've actually developed what I'm calling the Ingrid Maynard system. And that's because it focuses in on 3 key areas. So my approach is really something that I've refined over time. And it's not only part of this professional services offer, it's more broad than that. I'm taking that out into my own consulting space as well. But it focuses on 3 key areas. The first one is we focus on behaviours, which is ways of thinking, disciplines instead of skill. Now, skill is important, but it's the behaviours that really change the output. It's the behaviours, the things that we do around the skill, how we apply the skill, that really changes the outcomes that we're going to get. So I look at that. Then we look at building and embedding capability within the business. So we look at all of the things that are going to enable you to continue to do that, which is recruiting, coaching and developing more what I call rainmakers in the business. And then the final part is about measuring progress and success easily and meaningfully. And I do that in a couple of different ways. I diagnose at the start, and we use some diagnostics around that to identify who we've got in the firm and what sort of coaching methodology is going to intersect with that. And then we build the capability that we need, but particularly around the habits and behaviours. And then we look at ways of reinforcing that with coaching and with some technology to reinforce that. So when I talk about the 3 key areas, they're the 3 focus areas, but my system is about measure and assess first, which I've talked about. But the build part is twofold, and that is capability building, which is really about instilling better thinking, being responsible, being resilient, and being a giver. They're key ways of really starting to orientate our people so that when they go out to their client base, whether that be an existing client base or a new client base, they've got a different way of being to start with, and that starts with their thinking. We support that by shifting behaviour, and it's the 3 I's. So it's about insight building around client, market, competitor, and internal insights, because you need that in order to determine where are the gaps in my insight, and then that will determine how we progress that opportunity going forward. Have I got influence, which is the second I? So we've got insight, influence, and that's really all around the relationship that I have with this key client and across the client, not just with one key decision maker, but across the client. In decisions as well, influence across decisions and influence across action. So I look at a suite of skills there that people can employ in order to build relationships, have people make decisions and take action based on those decisions. And then the third I is the intimacy part. It's something that you know is there when people start to reveal confidential information to you. And I talk about trust as part of that intimacy build, the ecosystem, the intimacy that you have within the ecosystem. So that's your internal ecosystem and the external ecosystem as well. Referral partners, suppliers, people that can help you to build credibility or augment the service offer with your client. And then also intimacy, of course, with our clients, our precious, precious clients. So there's the thinking, then there's the behaviour, And then the third part of building capability is building disciplines. Man, that is important. Now, you'll notice here there was only one element that I talked about around skill building. And it's interesting, I had a conversation, just a little segue here. I had an interesting conversation with a sales leader the other day who talked just about skills, and he just wanted skills. Don't worry about behaviours. And I said, well, if we just teach skills are latent, like they're great and they sit there, but the behaviours are what bring the skill alive. So we train skill and we manage and coach behaviour. And without the underpinning behaviour, the skill has no impact. The skill on its own won't do anything. So behaviour is really important. So when I talk about the disciplines, these are the things that I would say are the secret sauce to success. And if you're building a process in a professional services firm, this is real shift to how people have done stuff. Because when they're focused on their technical expertise, they know how to do that. But for the most part, getting an architect, for example, to think in a different way towards a customer or towards a client or towards the market or how they engage, that takes some time. So we can have the great thinking, we can have the great behaviours, but without the underpinning disciplines, it's going to fall short. So again, you know, I love threes. There's three things here. So building the disciplines, activity cadence. So really, what's best practice for our firm around how often they should be meeting with prospective clients, existing clients, and what do they do within that? How do we build value? What's our value building and value delivery system? And then also, how do we keep a balanced ecosystem? So how do I kind of manage my high priority clients, my prospective new clients, and also who's in my ecosystem? Who could be a client one day, or who could be a referrer to a client? And how do I kind of build that ecosystem out? And where do I focus that activity? And what do I do when I'm focused on that activity? And then the second part of the build component is accountability. Now, I have a GROW model that talks about awareness, action, and acceptance, and then accountability. Without accountability, nothing really changes. And that's another part of the secret sauce too to my system. So I talk about performance and behaviour measures, practices and rhythms. And that is things like, okay, so how often are we going to come together to review what's in your pipeline, what your focus is for the week, for the month, for the quarter in relation to targets, and is that going to be enough in order to hit those numbers? And we talk about practices and rhythms as well, because we need it to be systemic or systematic. We can't just have little shots when we need an injection of business. Otherwise, we're going to have feast and famine, feast and famine, feast and famine. And that's another phenomenon that a lot of consulting firms actually confront. So once we've done the build part, then it's really about embedding capability. And you might say, well, why would you do that, Ingrid? Because you're kind of talking yourself out of a job there. And I guess I am, in a way. But what I really want to do is to empower professional services firms. In fact, I want to empower all of my customers to make sure that they have internal capability. So I want them to have internal program coaches. I would ideally love them to have an internal business development academy that they can continue to turn to. And that might include things like videos, toolkits, AI, other technology that reinforces that as well. And then there's the ongoing measures using those diagnostics just to check progress so that we know that we're not missing anything and that we know that we're moving forward. To find out what this could look like for your firm, or just to make a time to have a chat with me about what might be possible, or to get information about my keynote that really targets what professional services firms can do around business development, please email at admin@thesalesdoctor.com.au. admin@thesalesdoctor.com.au. And I'll see you next time on The Sales Revolution. Okay, you've been listening to The Sales Revolution. I'm Ingrid Maynard. And to find out how the Sales Doctor can help your organisation to transform its revenue, growth and profit, visit us on our website at www.thesalesdoctor.com.au. I look forward to your company next episode. Bye for now.